Daniel, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
So you are based in Beijing, is that right?
No, actually, I'm in Shenzhen, just across the
Oh,
border from Hong Kong. And I've been living here for about 12 years, part of the time in Hong Kong, but most of the time here in Shenzhen.
and are you an American?
I'm Canadian.
Oh, you're Canadian.
Yep.
So what made you, first of all, and I'm really interested in talking to you about so much that has gone on over there in China. I mean, what we're seeing, obviously, I live in Los Angeles. We're in a quasi lockdown. I don't know if what we're experiencing here was as intense as what you experienced there in China. I would imagine what we're going through is less intense, but we're going to find out from you. That's kind of the point of this conversation. But, really, first of all, how did you end up in China? Like, what are you doing over there?
Well, I love China. I'll get that right out of the way. I mean, I came here, I originally was doing a trading business, and I could have continued running it from Canada, but I came over to Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and I just really liked it here. I like the speed of life also. Yeah, in the first 10 years I was here, they built like 200 kilometers. There's my Canadian coming out. 200 kilometers. You can do the conversion.
Yeah. What is that in miles?
What is 120? I don't know, but 200 kilometers of subway line in 10 years. And in Toronto, we were waiting for this little shepherd line that took just years and years. And we had this train that we were talking about from downtown Toronto to the airport, which we had to discuss for 30 years before we actually broke ground. And I was just like, things are happening here, and the people are great. So I made an excuse to base myself here, even though I could have run that business from Canada. Then I got into running a brew pub. So I'm sitting in my brew pub right now, where we make craft beer, which was more of a fun kind of a side project.
That is, I think. I mean, that's amazing that you have a brew pub there. When we think of China, we think communism. And we think that, like, no freedom. How can you own a business? Yeah. Are you a Chinese citizen now? I mean, so how long have you been there?
So I've been here for 12 years.
Okay.
Technically, I could apply for a green card now. I just haven't, there hasn't really been any need to. I mean, I can do everything that I need to do here. You would think that having a local card, you could get access to more places or something. But I mean, even on my passport, I did again, Canadian 4,000 kilometer road trip through Tibet, and did some hiking through Tibet, and all these places people think you can't go. Mm-hmm. So I haven't really felt the need to apply for it. And
so you're on a visa?
Yeah, it's a kind of a employment / business visa. Mm-hmm. Even when you own the company, it's still called an employment visa that you're under. And so I'll renew that, and my last one lasts for about 3 years, and it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to renew, so it's been no big deal. I'm a Hong Kong resident also, because I was living over on that side for a couple of years, running my business from there. And that's actually what really got me into kind of social media and vlogging. It was kind of the Hong Kong protests, and I had a very kind of an unpopular opinion about it from the West's point of view. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to talk about that. And so that's where I got started in terms of online content.
Doing your YouTube channel.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So you've been there for 12 years. You have a brew pub. Chinese, are they drinking beer?
Oh, they are, yeah. And, the craft beer, I mean, I'm sure, especially where you are, you must know about the craft beer revolution. Mm-hmm. It's really taken off around the world. And all the other countries, China included, there was a little bit of a delay. So it's just kind of starting here, where people are learning what craft beer is, and they're realizing that there's so many different flavors, so many different possibilities, because everybody here just knew kind of German beer before that. And so yeah, people are drinking. Obviously, special circumstances right now. Not too many people are going out right now. We were closed for a while also, and there were certain rules which we can get into a bit later for restaurants and bars and places where people are gathering. So it's slow right now, but under normal. Under normal circumstances, quite a few people do come out. Yeah.
So before we go into, what kind of the lockdown measures were on you guys, what is the Chinese government doing for businesses? Because we just unveiled, here in the U.S., the Senate just passed the relief package, the virus relief package, that is pretty dismal for a lot of people. It's $1,200 to get you by for the next however long this lockdown is going to last. And You know, I mean, for businesses, it seems really difficult. They have to jump through a lot of hoops. And so, I mean, are you getting any relief from the Chinese government?
So there are certain pressures they're putting on landlords. So the landlord told us that our February rent is free for this place.
Wow.
And then for the rest of the year, a 5% discount on all of the remaining months of this year. Then we can apply for certain benefits for lower rates on, I believe it's taxes, utilities, a bunch of other things. And they have put programs together to encourage us not to let any of our workers go during this slow period, with different assistance packages in that regard. It's all pretty new right now, but I have my staff kind of sending the applications in, and it's looking pretty straightforward.
Are you stressed out? I mean, are you thinking, I don't know how I'm going to afford this, or does it look like you're actually going to get the necessary need, your needs met?
I think even with the packages, businesses will suffer. This is going to be a pretty difficult time to get through, and we're okay here. We're pretty light on the staffing, and we're relatively small shop. I mean, our brew equipment on the other side here takes up most of the shop space. So, I mean, we will pull through, but we are seeing other restaurants closing. There are some other places that are, yeah.
And they're just not going to I mean, they're not making it.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, the restaurant business is a difficult business anywhere, and sometimes people are working with pretty tight margins, and they're definitely not preparing or planning for any sort of an emergency situation like this. I mean, it's an opportunity also. The ones that do pull through, this is a way to shake out a lot of some of the smaller ones, or the ones that were suffering to begin with. And when the traffic really starts to come back, the ones who did manage to pull through will definitely benefit. So I'm not personally worried, but it is concerning to see what's going on around us. I mean, we will get more business because other people are closing, but I would have rather had our business succeed on better terms than on relying on other people not being able to continue, which isn't a very nice thing to happen.
So we're in March right now, the end of March. You guys, when did you guys start going into, did you guys do a full lockdown in your area? Because I know that Wuhan went into full on lockdown, didn't they? I mean, what was their circumstance versus yours?
Yeah, so I've got a bunch of friends in Wuhan, and it was a lot more mandatory there. And so what would happen here is everybody was recommended to stay home, but we were still allowed to go out. We were still allowed to go out to the grocery stores. There were a lot of controls in place. Every time you re-entered your building complex, you had to have your temperature measured.
Wow.
We had to.
Who did that? Is there somebody
the security
there?
guards? Basically, the security guards at all the entrances. Most buildings here, every building has its own security. There are some village areas in Shenzhen, which are, they don't really have a main gate. They don't have security. So what they would do for those villages is they would block off most of the entrances, and then you'd have one main entrance that people would get into the village from. And there you'd have government officials there checking their temperatures and doing all the things that they needed to do. And
what happened if you were unlucky and your temperature was a little high?
So then you've got to go to a fever clinic. You got to go to a fever clinic, and they'll check you out. They'll do the COVID-19 test on you, the swab and everything like that. Potentially go into a quarantine area for a certain period of time if it does look like you're high risk. There was a lot of obviously a lot of conspiracy theories out there, a lot of people seeing the stuff I'll to back up to that example I told you about the villages being blocked off and having one entrance. What I was seeing showing up on Western social media was showing the blocked entrances and saying, see, nobody's allowed in or out. They're locking people up. And just around the corner from where they were taking that video, that was where the entrance was. And in terms of those people, those suspected cases, if you had a fever, they would go into, sometimes they would go into quarantine, and they might have to wait the 14 days or whatever it is. And the thing is I did an interview with a doctor not too long ago from Wuhan on my channel. And
yeah, I watched it. It was great. I think everybody should watch that video, and I'll put the link down below to watch that interview, which will also, send people over to your channel as well. But that interview was great. I mean, just listening to the inner workings of how those temporary hospitals that were put up, how they worked with the red zones, the green zones, the way how they had food from the various regions that was prepared for them, specific to their likes and dislikes. I mean, it was
They were really taken care of. Some of them are starting to go back home, and you're seeing scenes in their hometowns of these doctors arriving with a police escort in front and 10 kilometers of people lined up along the street to cheer them yeah, it's really, really touching. I mean, even Xi Jinping doesn't get a welcome like that when he comes to this town.
Yeah, but so it's an incredible interview. So I definitely will link down because everybody should watch that.
Definitely. So onto the main point, though, even he was saying that, the COVID-19 tests aren't perfect. Sometimes they had to retest multiple times. And they knew that when they've got these people who have a fever and they've got to really check them carefully. And during that time when we were all hearing from outside, oh, the numbers are fake, there must be so many more. Otherwise, why are they building these hospitals? As if, we're supposed to be more reactive here than proactive. It's like being proactive is such a foreign concept to so many people that they're saying, oh, well, this must mean something.
Yeah.
But granted, we were, and even the doctor was worried because that doctor, he gets his, news through VPN. Also, he follows my YouTube channel. And he was saying he was getting worried also, saying, before he was sent to the hospital, wow, is it really a lot worse than it is? I have a sister-in-law who works in one of the provinces on the front lines, and she was in charge of people who were in their home quarantines. And she would go around from home to home to do their daily temperature checks, make sure they had the food delivered, ask them if they had anything else they needed and things like that. And I asked her, I said, what do you think about these numbers, based on interacting with people? Do you think they're fake? Do you think we really have more numbers than what's really being reported? And she says, no, the numbers, she thinks they're honest. However, she believes that a lot of the suspected cases will turn into confirmed cases. And that was the case because when they changed the metrics of how they tested people, we saw that one day where
huge
it jumped
spike,
up.
Right?
Exactly. And it's because they were, I can't remember exactly what it was. They were including CTs. They were including all of these other indicators. But people had, we were given so much information also. Like, we were all stuck at home for a really long time. If we had a confirmed case in our building, your whole building would be when you're actually on lockdown, where now your food is delivered to you, you're not allowed to go in and go in and come out. So when we're all at home, we're bored because even if we weren't on a kind of a more strict lockdown, so to speak, like that. Everybody was pretty much participating. You didn't really see people out on the streets. We were really bored at home. But the one thing we had in common was every morning we opened up our app to see how many new cases are there, how many new deaths, how many recoveries. Then there were secondary apps, also city level ones that we would look at. So we would have, we could see on a map our neighborhood and little dots showing up in terms of where the cases were in which building complex. So the closest one to where I am now is just across the street, right across the street from my bar. And I got to be honest with you, it was pretty nerve-wracking to see that report and see, like, it felt like it was closing in on you. It's like, oh, there's one over there now. There's one over there now. So it was worrying for everybody. But I think the most interesting thing for me, because before this even started, it feels like a lifetime ago now, because we've been through so much through such a short period of time. I actually had to go back through my own vlogs to remind myself what was my mindset throughout the whole thing before I'm speaking to you here. And the one thing that I found the most interesting was, it wasn't really the people who were panicking or getting really concerned first. It was really the government doing all of this stuff. And we were just looking at it saying, whoa, is it this serious? We've got to take it this seriously. Whereas, in Canada, now Canada's taking a lot more action. But I felt like, and my sister's in Germany, I felt like hearing from my family, and it was the opposite. It was the people saying, come on, like, we should do something here. Maybe we should pay attention to this a bit more. But it was the complete opposite here. We started saying, whoa, what's going on, when we started seeing all of these things put in place by the government. So it was quite interesting in that regard.
So the government clearly was prepared for something like this. Like, they must have had a plan in place prior to this, maybe because of SARS outbreak 17 years ago. Maybe then they had this, okay, if this were to happen again, this is what we would do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was quarantined in 2008 because of an H1N1 scare. I was taking a boat from Hong Kong airport to Shenzhen port, and somebody on the boat from South America ended up having a fever. And so we all got put on a bus. We got sent out to a quarantine facility. It was quite nice also. The communication could have been better, but overall it was a pretty good experience. And I think based on hearing from my friends who are coming back into China now and going into quarantine, it's an even more detailed process now. So absolutely, I definitely think they got a lot of experience from that. And you can only imagine now after this, how much more prepared they'll be in the future. And they found all of the, problems along the way. I would say the thing that they moved a bit slowly on initially was controlling the price gouging on masks and things like that. There was an initial rush in the beginning. And, I know in the US and other places, some of the private companies took it on themselves to cancel seller accounts from people who are really price gouging.
Yeah.
Here, it was when the government really caught on to it, they basically, there were some really heavy fines for people who were doing that because they weren't supposed to do that. There was clear rules against it. Then
did you guys have a big run on toilet paper?
No. I can't figure that one out. I've been reading articles on it to try to wrap my head around it. And
it's the strangest thing.
Yeah.
Honestly, it just makes Westerners. I don't know. I don't think Europe did that at all because they use bidets over there. But I don't know. And I think Canada, did they have?
They did. They had a. I
mean, it just makes the North Americans look like lunatics.
It is a
like
bit
we
silly,
just love our toilet paper.
Yeah. I mean, the best explanation I saw was, it's because they take up so much space on the shelves that when people start taking even a few, it looks like there's a mad rush, and then all you can do is continue on. And then obviously the consequences we're seeing now is that people are using substitutes and clogging up the city, sewage systems and things like that. Like that's, We never saw any issues like that. The grocery stores were all well stocked.
Really? So, because we're still having problems with the grocery stores. I mean, it's just such a disaster here. Honestly, it is such a disaster. Now they finally, the grocery stores are allowing elderly in for 1 hour, elderly exclusive so that they can get, which is the smartest thing to do because they're going into the grocery stores after it's been fully sanitized. Mm-hmm. So they're not getting any of the germs from everybody else coming in, and they're able to get the things that they need. And the cheaper items that, when you're living off Social Security, you can't have everybody taking all the cheap stuff and then you're left with only expensive things you can't afford and you still have to eat, So, I mean, it's just been such a disaster here.
Yeah.
But when you said that you had food, so the buildings that were on lockdown had food delivery.
Right.
What's that? I don't think we have anything like that here.
Well, so if you were depending on the kind of quarantine you were in, if you were in like a quarantine center, the government would provide all the meals to you. But if you were under home quarantine, we could use, there's tons and tons of grocery store delivery apps here. I think it's Alibaba or Tencent. They have their own system, and it actually evolved a lot in 2019. There's so many people just not going to the grocery anymore. They're using these delivery apps. So for self-quarantine, I think people were paying for it themselves, but there were so many options available, and it was perfect timing that this evolved in 2019. Maybe there's another conspiracy theory. This is all because of the supermarkets wanting to improve their,
Right. They're wanting to get a run on the economy. Finally, they're like, all right, here's our chance. Well, here, I've been self-isolating for the last couple of weeks because I am a suspected case. Yeah, they won't give me a test though, because they say that my symptoms aren't severe enough. I'd have to have, I would need to be to the point where I'd maybe need hospitalization before they would give me a test. But I've been self-isolating, and it has been nearly impossible for me to get grocery delivery. Normally I do grocery delivery often normally. So even before this whole ordeal, and I had no problems in the past, and I would use my same company. The last time I attempted to use them, their system took my money and I never got my groceries. And then I contacted them. I can't get a hold of them. They've said we've had to temporarily close. We've had too many orders. And so I didn't get my groceries and I didn't get my money. I've tried various other grocery delivery. I can't get any other groceries. And this is like I'm sitting here thinking I might have this, but I have to eat too. I can't sit here and starve. And so I can't get any grocery delivery. I can't find any times online. Amazon Fresh, they have grocery delivery. When I fill up my cart. When I go to check out, it says no times are available. I'm sitting here thinking the only thing I can do is I have to go out there and then risk people's lives. That's the position our government is putting us in because I have to eat and other people, what is a person supposed to do? So I've had to do food delivery, I'm ordering from restaurants and having them bring it. But even that's risky. The person that's giving me my food, I'm sitting there like trying to stay as far away from them as I can. I'm like, put that on the ground. If they want me to sign something, I say, sign it yourself, but even then it's still this, I mean, it's a mess. It's a total mess. It should be set up a little bit better to those who need to be quarantined, more suspected cases or government quarantine. Like if they lock down your building, then they have something in place, like they would bring you the food. So the buildings, when the government locked them down and said, you have somebody there, so now you all have to go on lockdown, did they set aside special delivery for them to make sure the residents of those buildings got their food?
So it pretty much tied into the system. The system was already robust enough that we just tied into the existing systems. The only thing I could say is that before all of this happened and before Chinese New Year, we could place online grocery orders and we could get our order in 15 to 45 minutes. It's really, really fast.
Right.
But after this started, sometimes you're looking at 2 to 4 hours, or you put your order in the day before. That's the most inconvenience. I think they were limiting the number of staff that were on. There were people that weren't allowed to come back to Shenzhen yet, particularly if they were from Hubei province.
Mm-hmm.
But we've still, I haven't heard of anybody running into that kind of a problem saying, what am I supposed to do now? One of the other things to keep in mind is that all of the government workers in China, and there are a lot of them, it doesn't matter in what capacity, if you're from the tax office, if you're anything, everybody's working on this. Everybody, it's all hands on deck. If there were, one of the things we had to do, which may sound very intrusive to somebody outside of China, is we had to download apps also to use the subway system to get back into our own building complexes. And what it would do is it would track where we were going, and and then what it would do is if we were on the subway together with somebody who ends up being a confirmed case, we would be notified right away. And they'd say, hey, you're really at risk now. Stay at home for now while we figure out what to do. And there was something interesting that came out of that, a realization, because originally the government was asking some of these private companies to hand over this information to them because of what's going on. And from what I understand, they refused. And they said that what you need to do is you need to do what every other company in the world does, even like on Facebook and stuff like that, get them to download a third-party app. And everybody's got to grant permissions to that app, and then you can track them as your own kind of users when they're using this app. And so the interesting thing for me is that a lot of people would assume that the Chinese government could just do this without having to jump through all these hoops, that they just know where you are all the time anyways. But they put this in place for us. And the foreigners, to get back to the point about all hands on deck, the foreigners in China who had trouble, understanding how the app worked or, how to install it, they would have people go to their homes and actually help them and everything like that, and explain it to them, get them to download and install it so that they wouldn't show up at the subway unable to use the subway system because they don't have this app installed. So there's
China's like the Borg.
Are you a Star Trek fan also?
Yeah. And really, China's just like operating a well-oiled machine.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, there's a lot of people here who obviously this was a pretty unfortunate thing, and there's still things to learn from this, but it really made people here just respect the system here so much more, saying, wow, especially when they can kind of contrast it to what's going on outside.
They're seeing chaos, right? Chaos in the rest of the world. I mean, Asia in general was able to get a handle on this really fast and easy, and everywhere in Asia.
Singapore had some good systems. Korea had some good systems. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, even countries that weren't really affected, like Vietnam, didn't end up having much spread in the country because they do think that there's a weather and humidity linked to how quickly this virus spreads.
I've heard that, yeah.
But, Vietnam had tests made, ready to go. And they just were like, well, we're just not having very many cases. So they ended up sending a bunch of their tests over to Italy. They're like, you guys need these. We don't really.
Wow.
But, the fact that they were still manufacturing their own tests ready to go, they were ready. They just didn't get very many, but they were, right there. And that's just going to show like the Asian mentality, and I know the Asian mentality, being half myself, the differences are stark between my, being a mixed person, seeing my Asian side and how they operate versus my Caucasian side and how that side operates. They both have their wonderful upsides and downsides to both sides for sure. So, in Wuhan, they had obviously a much stricter lockdown. What was theirs like in comparison to yours? How was theirs worse?
So theirs, was more mandated. So I have a friend who also owns a brew pub in Wuhan, and he basically just had to stay at home. That was it. He had to stay at home. He had his food delivered to him, just not allowed out. So I would say that was it. It was just, it wasn't a suggestion. It was, okay, everybody needs to stay home. You did have a few villages, like I have a nephew in Jiangxi, just outside of the capital, Nanchang. And in his village, during the really, really early stages, they actually got dump trucks and blocked the roads, the main roads out of the village. Now, the village is self-sustainable. You can buy all your vegetables, your foods, you have everything you need to live in the village, but they just didn't want people moving around. And they knew they couldn't rely on just trusting people to just do that by themselves. I would say people do, generally speaking, work here together, but they just didn't even want to have a situation like with that guy who got on a JetBlue flight while he was waiting for his coronavirus test, results.
Yeah.
People do that. This isn't a particular country issue. This is just, you will have individuals, and it only takes one or two to just mess it up for everyone and make this really difficult to control. So I would say, yeah, that those are the more extreme things that were done, blocking physical entrances to villages, or saying, no, you absolutely are not allowed to come out.
So it sounds like to me what China did, the contact tracing was probably a big one. To say, okay, if you all have this app and we all know where you are, and then if somebody ends up with it and we can go back through their history and figure out where they were and where everybody and who all was with them because of the GPS and the app. Yep. It sounds like that contract and I know South Korea did the same thing with contact tracing. Sounds like that was a huge part of being able to get control of this.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
catching it early. Kind of early enough.
Exactly. There were other little things that were done in terms of, catching people who have fevers and saying, okay, you need to go to the fever clinic. Every single business here, whether it's a gas station, supermarket, anything, you have to get your temperature checked before you go in. Everybody, that was the rule. When we opened up here also, when we reopened, we needed to have certain things ready, a disinfectant, masks, the wireless temperature checking, and the government would come by to make sure we had that before they approved us to open again.
Does everybody have to wear a mask at a brew pub right now? How are they going to drink their beer?
So it was actually funny because in the beginning, in the early stages, when coffee shops were allowed to have customers come back in, there was a rule where you had to sit 1.5 or 2 meters apart from each other, or 6 feet, or whatever it is. And it doesn't matter if you were a couple. It doesn't matter if you came in together. And so I had a friend, he went in with his son. Okay, they had to sit aside, a certain distance aside. And when he took off his mask to drink, and while he was speaking, while he was drinking, the Starbucks staff came up to him and said, no. You cannot talk to each other without your mask on. even though they came in together. Right. So, and yeah, and you're gonna find funny, weird things like this when you're going into such overdrive to make sure they control it. You're gonna have some of these things. They say, okay, was that a little bit too much? Probably, but it's better than the alternative, not doing anything at all. You had some other things that some people might consider really weird. For example, I heard that at one point they banned pharmacies from selling cough syrup. And their concern with that was that if people wanted to kind of self-treat themselves, and particularly because your lungs are filling up and stuff like that, if you go and you try to suppress your cough with cough medicine, you're going to put yourself at huge risk. And also the community, obviously, if you're just trying to, wander around while this is happening.
Yeah, you're trying to suppress your symptoms. And I heard of people doing that, taking some Tylenol, to pass the fever check type thing.
Yeah, there were some people who were fined for that. There was one person who came into China, suppressed their fever, because they wanted to get tested and checked in China, because I think they weren't getting the necessary treatment or attention, or couldn't even get tested back home. And so they flew into China and took the fever medication. And people were really not happy about that. But,
so what we saw over here was, when Wuhan shut down, we saw videos of people being dragged off, women that were shoved into vans. They were unwilling. They didn't want to go. They were fighting back. You had these men in these hazmat suits trying to wrestle a woman into a van. And of course, the sentiment over here was, wow, this dictatorship, this is draconian, this is absurd. And now here we are in a lockdown that's, now they're ticketing people that go outside. At least that's what the mayor said, or I think it was the mayor I was watching on the news, and he said, we're ticketing. It's a misdemeanor if you go out there. But I mean, so obviously that's because they were being forced into a quarantine. Is that right? So they had been tested.
Yeah, there were a lot of things where people weren't cooperating. There were some videos, and the Chinese government, they were releasing these videos themselves online also through their own public accounts. Like they weren't trying to hide the ones where there was, for example, somebody who had a fever at a highway check and they didn't want to cooperate, and they said, that's it, you got to get out. And they're trying to, pull them out, and they have training for this stuff. They're actually putting this stuff online. There were some other stuff that were things from previous events that were misrepresented. As you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of fake news that comes out during this time also. Like, for example, there was, and just things taken out of context. Like there was one with the medical workers walking, or they looked like they were masked up and they had guns and stuff like that, and they were walking. For what I understand, they were responding to a specific incident, because there still are going to be incidents that police need to respond to. But if police are responding to any sort of a domestic issue or anything like that, they are going to be masked up like that when they're moving around outside. The videos of the people kind of being locked into their apartments and stuff like that, I don't know if it's true or not, but to be honest, I wouldn't doubt it. I would think that if there were some people who just were not listening, they kept going out. I think that probably happened. You can be guaranteed that they would have had their food delivered to them and all of that stuff. Was it too much? Was it too far? Maybe. This is a really difficult thing to say during a time like this. What's the alternative? Put them into a prison with other people and then just let it spread in the prison or something like that, if they really are refusing to cooperate? I don't know. I think it's a really hard thing to judge, but I will say that this is the stuff that China needs to learn from during this time also. And there were provincial governments that came out with statements that they handed down to local police and local government saying, listen, don't go too far with this. Make sure you're respecting the rights of people and stuff like that. There are official press releases where I think the provincial governments recognize that in some cases what they're seeing is people are going too far with this enforcement. And
you're always going to have that, that police officer who has a bit of a power trip. We don't have that problem in the United States at all.
Yeah. And you can imagine the kind of stress that they're going through too. They're out there and they're going through. They're the ones on the front line expected to deal with this. The videos of the doctors who are breaking down and yelling and stuff like that. I mean, people look at that also and say, "Oh, how terrible China is! Look at this! Look at how they're." This is going to be a stressful time for everybody, including frontline medical workers. Obviously, the doctor that I spoke to, he was part of the second wave, and they weren't facing as many equipment shortages and all this kind of stuff, and they had their processes in place by that point. But you're going to see some stuff that definitely needs to be reviewed here and needs to be done better the next time around. Hopefully, there's not a next time, but yeah.
So you said that you were in quarantine at one point back in 2008?
That's correct, yeah.
And what was that like?
We had to sit on the bus. They had these kind of CDC workers with masks and suits coming on the boat, checking all of our details, our travel history. Then we got put on a bus. There was a medical worker at the front explaining to us in English what was going on, how they need to test one person that they had taken away for H1N1. We were driving down the highway. One funny scene was when we got to the toll booth at the highway, they didn't want to open the window to speak to the lady at the toll booth, and they were trying to explain. And then they wrote on it and put it up to the window that there might be some H1N1 suspected cases on the bus. And then she covered her mouth and waved the bus. And she's like, go, go, go. Then we got to the facility. We each had a room. They delivered food to us, everything like that. And it was, I think we stayed there for 2 nights. And then the test results came back for the other guy that he didn't have H1N1, and we could all go. But they took our contact details down, how they could reach us just in case anything else came up. And it was pretty well organized. During the time we were in the quarantine facility, I think the communication probably could have been a little bit better. And I was worrying a little bit. I was like, well, what's going on? And I actually, I contacted, I didn't know too much about China at that point. So I had triangulated my location on my BlackBerry and then sent it to the Canadian consulate and said, hey, I'm here, can somebody get some answers for me? And everything was fine in the end. And it was, other than the communication, everything else was pretty good.
Were you able to contact your family or friends?
Yeah. I was speaking to my parents from there also. And
so you had your phone, and that you weren't like, they didn't take all your stuff from you.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, sorry.
What was your sleeping like? I mean, you said you were there for 2 nights?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it was fine. It was a really nice, quiet area. I've still got pictures of it somewhere. It's overlooking a like some sort of a lake. It's like luxury.
But I
It's
mean, did
pretty
you have
good.
was it like bunks, and
Oh no,
you
but
all
it was a big room with a bed, my own bathroom. It was
Oh, so it was like a
yeah.
hotel room.
It was almost like some sort of an inn or like a resort kind of a thing
Oh, a
somewhere
resort.
in
Oh, they
it was
take you
it
to
was almost
resorts for quarantine.
yeah, it was
Shoot.
somewhere in between that. Yeah.
So now, yeah, so that was kind of, just kind of, because, when we imagine people being taken away into a quarantine facility, it's like, oh gosh, do you get to talk to your friends and family? Do you just disappear? Do they know? Does your family know how you're doing? That is the one thing that's kind of breaking my heart about this whole virus thing, not just in China, but all around the world, is that there are people that are now in hospitals, whether they're fighting the virus or whether they have some other issue that has come up that is life threatening, and their family members are not able to go see them. They're locking everybody out of the hospitals, even in my hometown of Idaho. So Idaho gets criticized for being one of my home state of Idaho. Idaho gets criticized for being slow to reaction.
Okay.
But even Idaho being slow to react, the hospitals still pretty much locked down and said you're only allowed one visitor and one visitor only. And I just think, my gosh, there's people dying in these hospitals every day. I mean, people die, 150,000 people die every day in the world. So these people that are dying all around the world, 150,000 a day, they're in these hospitals that are in lockdown. They're allowed one
Right.
family member, if not, in some cases, like in Italy, no family members are in complete quarantine, and these people are just dying alone.
Yeah, it's a really difficult thing right now in so many ways. I mean, you imagine the medical workers also that have to deal with this overload of patients, that have to deal with upset and angry people who can't go in to see their family.
And no updates, they don't know, like, how are they? Are they alive? Are they dead? I mean, just the stress of the whole
Yeah.
thing is, unbelievable
Yeah,
to me.
yeah. I mean, it's really difficult, obviously, to prepare for something like this, to imagine that something like this will happen. But the best we can do everywhere is just look at this and see what were the worst parts of this experience and how can we prevent it from happening in the future. I mean, this is going to be a massive learning experience for everybody. We haven't seen something like this in obviously a long time.
So what is the feeling like now? So you were in lockdown starting when? Like, when did you start? When did you have to close your pub and go home?
So we were closed for Chinese New Year anyways. We closed for a few days during Chinese New Year. And then when this all started getting serious, we said, okay, well, we're not going to open. We're going to stay closed. There was actually mandates here where bars or nightclubs or places that kind of have a lot of packed in people, they weren't allowed to open anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Restaurants that remained open during Chinese New Year could continue doing business, but mostly just for delivery and takeaway. So now everything's really starting to get back to normal. We can accept.
But this is like
customers.
2 months later, so it's like 2 months.
This is 2 months later. With really strict controls and being able to track everybody and really kind of get this under control. So the schools are still closed, though. The date for the schools to reopen kept getting pushed out. They say we will reopen next month. That looks like it might happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if they push it out further.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of kids are getting their schoolwork at home. You're seeing a lot more people walking out on the streets now, but everybody's still wearing masks. The Shenzhen government said that if you are going outside and you're not around very large crowds of people, you no longer need to wear a mask. We're pretty safe here, but everybody's still doing it. It's a habit that people have now. And I actually have a funny story. One of my friends who lives on the other side of town in Lohu district, he went outside and he forgot to put his mask on. And people were looking at him so strange. And he suddenly realized I didn't put my mask on, and he literally felt naked, he said. And so, yeah. And so he quickly rushed back to put his mask on. And it's amazing how it's so opposite, in the West. If you're wearing a mask, people are looking at you like,
like you're a freak, like what's wrong with you? Yeah.
And it's
although now it's more common. If you go out
good.
now and you look around at the, and I mean, people are definitely more and more wearing masks from what I can see.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, It makes sense. I mean, we know that this spreads while you're asymptomatic, and people say, "Oh, it won't prevent me from catching, the virus from someone else, but it will catch me from spreading it." Well, that's good. We should do that
Right,
then,
right.
and that's why it's a community effort. And the other thing too is when you're
If
wearing
you
a
can
mask.
find masks and gloves. I mean, I
Yeah,
can't find a mask or gloves. I luckily have one little bottle of sanitizer so that, because I live in an apartment building, I have to do my laundry. I still have to go downstairs to get the food. I have to touch things. I don't have any gloves. I mean, this is the thing that's so ridiculous about this is here I am thinking I might have it. So I
yeah,
carry a towel around, to open up
yeah.
everything. And I make sure I sanitize my hands before I touch any, before I go out there, even with the towel. And I mean,
Right.
it's just
Yeah.
such a nightmare.
There's a lot of new mask factories opening up here, and the supply is pumping out. I'm actually planning on potentially visiting one on Monday and doing a tour, like a video tour of what they're doing, talking to them about what the demand has been like, if they can keep up with orders, and at the end of the day, a lot of us have a habit, and I have it too. I didn't realize it until this started happening of touching your face.
Yeah.
Once in a while. And that's the other thing that the mask does also is it prevents you from being able to touch your mouth and nose. And I think overall it's a pretty good idea. But yeah, that's the problem is how do we make sure that everybody's got enough supply? That's the biggest constraint right now.
Yeah, I mean, so many people hoarded all of this, and they didn't even think about, what about the older people that are going to need them? They need them the most, and yet they can't
right.
even get them.
So that's one thing they did here too, was halfway through this, they put a law in place where the pharmacies here